Good evening. I'd like to call the business meeting of the Portland Board of Public Education to order. It is Tuesday, September 3rd, 2019. The Portland Board of Public Education is meeting at City Hall in Council Chambers. May I please ask the superintendent to call the roll?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Mr. Atkinson?
Here.
Mr. Balfons?
Here.
Ms. Bondo?
Présente.
Ms. Figdor? Ms. Davis? Ms. Morioni?
Here.
Ms. Thompson?
Here.
Mr. Varro?
Here.
Mr. Inabanza? Mr. Norris?
Here.
Ms. Power-Rakowski? Mr. Samuntu?
Présent.
Mr. Abdirahman? And Chair Rodriguez.
Presente. Both Ms. Davis and Ms. Victor did let me know ahead of time that they won't be joining us tonight because of family illnesses. So we wish their families well, and we'll see them when they're back in town. Would everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening again. As you all know, today marked the start of the 2019-2020 school year, and on behalf of the school board, I'd want to welcome back to school our students, their families, and all of Portland Public Schools teachers and staff. It's a testament of what is great and powerful about the first day of class. Seeing all the back-to-school pictures on Facebook this morning actually made social media enjoyable for once. As a friend commented earlier today, it's like our shared humanity is on display, and it feels good. We're excited for all that can be achieved working together, and we wish all of you to have a positive year of growth. Next, we were due for a student report, but Anna Power-Rakowski also alerted me she won't be able to join us today, so we're moving on to the report of the superintendent. Mr. Botana, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to begin my comments today by recognizing the Maliseet, Micmac, Penobscot, and Passamaquoddy tribes, known collectively as the Wabanaki, or people of the Dawnland, the original inhabitants of the land on which our city and schools stand, and we're honored to have their children learning side by side with all of our students in our schools today. I would like to comment on the move of the Adult Probation Office to a building adjacent to Presumpscot Elementary School. I know that there are many in the school community who are advocating to relocate programming from that office. We will continue to work with the community and the Maine Department of Corrections to ensure that there is timely and accurate information about any developments in this area. But most importantly, I want to reassure families that our administration and staff are focused on ensuring that students are safe while they are in our care. I'm grateful to Principal Angie Taylor and the Presumpscot faculty and staff for redoubling their supervision efforts. Today, as you heard from Chair Rodriguez, was our first day of school. Whether from East End to Riverton or Presumpscot to Rowe, nearly 7,000 students began what I know will be a wonderful year of new and exciting learning experiences. Whether in our science labs, our early childhood sand tables, or our libraries and gyms, our nearly 1,200 professional staff will strive to ensure that they grow as students and citizens of this great city over the next 175 days. And whether through our behavioral health programming, on our sports field, or in our field trips and expeditions, our specialists, our coaches, our partner staff, and our hundreds of volunteers will strive to extend life lessons that will be with them for the rest of their lives. I couldn't be prouder or more excited than I am to watch our Portland Public School students as they become prepared and empowered for the next step. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Superintendent. Next, for the report of the Secretary, consideration and action to approve the minutes of the meeting of August 20th, 2019. Is there a motion? Ms. Trevorrow, second by Ms. Thompson. Are there any questions on the motion? Seeing none, is there any public comment on the motion? And seeing none, any board discussion? We have none. We'll put on a vote. All those in favor of approving the minutes of the meeting of August 20th, 2019, please indicate. And Ms. Bondo, you were not. Okay, so we have 7 in favor, and Ms. Bondo is abstaining from the vote. excuse me, consent items. Will the superintendent please read the list of consent items?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Sorry.
It is moving fast. Under Board Policy KCD, the school board accepts by unanimous consent contributions made to the school district. As required by that policy, all of the donations are listed in the board agenda under this item, and our practice is for each donor to receive a written contribution acknowledgement expressing our heartfelt gratitude as well as for their tax purposes. I would like to thank the many generous contributors to the Portland Public Schools who have made donations of durable goods, commemorative items of commemorative value, and goods of substantial value and historical or commemorative significance. The beneficiaries and contributors are Ocean Avenue Elementary School received a donation to purchase T-shirts for the music department's chorus from Walmart of Lewiston, and Ocean Avenue Elementary School also received school supplies for staff and students from the Sons of the American Revolution and the Daughters of the American Revolution, the Elizabeth Wadsworth chapter here in Portland. So thank you very much. We're grateful to all of our generous support and contributions to the work of the Portland Public Schools.
Thank you, Superintendent. We are moving fast. Next, for the board focus on educational items or educational issues, we have a presentation on the BAR grant findings and the next steps for this project or for this work. Superintendent, will you set us up for this?
Sure.
Thank you.
In 2014, under the auspices of ConnectEd, the United Way of Greater Portland conducted a study looking at the post-secondary success of Portland Public Schools graduates. That work has been the basis of the post-secondary work of ConnectEd, focusing on the transition from high school to college for students, as well as the establishment of the high school retention work group. As with many of our efforts, our ability to reproduce that analysis and track whether the interventions we put in place was lacking. For that reason, when the Bar Foundation announced the competition to allow New England districts to conduct an in-depth analysis of a graduating class, both backward and forward, it was something that we jumped at. Today, we're going to share the findings from that analysis. Through the Bar Foundation grant, we've been able to follow the class of 2016 back to when they were in middle school and all the way through to the start of their second year of college enrollment. As I mentioned, one of the main reasons why we took this opportunity was that we were able to leverage great expertise from EY Parthenon, an international consulting firm based in Boston that has worked with school districts across the country doing this type of work as part of their public sector practice. One of the values from this work is that our staff has been able to work side by side with the EY Parthenon folks, and as a result, we're in a position to replicate this analysis going forward. I would like to recognize Executive Director of Data and Technology, Mustafa Rastampur, and our data manager, Jamie Kearney, both of whom are here, for their work on this project and their effort to ensure that we are structured to be able to do this into the future. As we discussed at the last board meeting, one constant in our data is that family income and background are the key determinants of student success in Portland Public Schools. There are findings and actions coming from this project that are predictably about our Portland Promise equity work. The extent to which we take the lessons from this work to take actions that remove the institutional barriers that make this possible will define the value of this entire project. So tonight, Assistant Superintendent Malia Barrett and Barrett Wilkerson, our equity coordinator, will be leading the discussion. In addition to managing the project, Barrett has led the work of bringing together our district and school leaders, as well as our guidance team, to ensure that we developed a set of action steps based on the data that hold promise to ensure that more and more of our students graduate and go on to post-secondary success. So I'm going to turn it over to Malia.
Great, and I am not Malia Barrett, though I like that new name. So Barrett and I are here.
Nelly in my notes. So I don't know what. I think I looked up right at that moment and I saw Malia Barrett side by side. So
it's kind of like my maiden name, so I dig it. Yes, so Barrett and I are going to walk you through the outcomes from the data project tonight. So Barrett will set up just giving you an overview of the project. I'll talk a little bit about the outcomes that we see in terms of student post-secondary success rates. We'll look at what are the contributing factors and what can we kind of understand that's predictive of post post-secondary success, and then step you through 4 kind of key implications or action steps that we're planning to take as a result of this data. It's a lot of data and information, so definitely kind of jot down your questions as we go, because we could get otherwise stuck on a single slide if we start to take questions throughout, but we'll do questions at the end.
Great, thanks, Malia. Okay, so I think Malia gave you kind of the quick overview of the presentation, and I will reiterate that any one slide, there's a lot to learn from, and so it kind of can be overwhelming. But I want to first frame really what this project was for you. So Javier started that for us, but basically it was a 1-year project, which we are approaching the end of with the generous support of the Barr Foundation to really understand post-secondary outcomes of our students. And we felt that this was so well aligned with the Portland Promise goals and would deepen our understanding of what it means for students to be on or off track, and understand some of the early warning indicators, which we'll be sharing with you. So the specific context they used is they looked at the 2016 cohort of our students who last fall were in their second year post-graduation. And so they used data looking back at that group of students from all of their high school experience as well as into middle school to understand what were the early warning indicators, what were their high school experiences, and where were they at now. So this was current as of this point in time, a year ago, essentially. And the qualitative research was conducted by EY Parthenon, the organization mentioned earlier. And then there was qualitative aspects led by Spring Point, an organization based out of Massachusetts. So just as you're thinking about the data that I'm about to show you, know that they were taking a cohort of our students, and so if they had moved out at some point, they were no longer considered part of our high school of that 2016 cohort. If they moved in, however, they would have been added to the year that they joined. So that's how we got to the number we're at. And this first data slide shows you just the kind of demographic breakdown of who that group of students were. The one note here is that English learners are slightly underrepresented from what we have typically, so just that's probably the only thing that is a little different than our average. And there are, of course, additional racial and ethnic groups that are represented in Portland Public Schools, but if there wasn't enough data, we couldn't have them represented in this. It was too small a sample, so that's the other thing just to note when you're thinking about these things. So it's some of the, the categories that I think 15 was the minimum. So when there's demographic breakouts, you'll see only 4 racial ethnic categories broken out. So what we learned about our 2016 cohort, on average, we have a weighted GPA of a B plus average. Their attendance was 92%, and in general, they were taking 1 to 2 AP courses. It works out to be 1.6 AP courses while they were in high school, just to generally frame who they were as a cohort. And Malia's gonna take it over.
Great. One quick caveat before we get into some of the findings is that when we're looking at post-secondary success, we're looking at students who are enrolling in and or persisting in either 2 or 4-year colleges. And when we think about students being on a productive post-secondary path, we include in that students who choose to pursue a professional career straight out of high school. So just want to acknowledge that this doesn't capture those students because it's harder to get that data. But regardless, we do believe that the insights that we were able to glean from this data are very meaningful, relevant, and actionable, but I just wanted to mention that. So what we see is that first, 91% of our students in this cohort graduated within 6 years. But then we started to look at what percent enrolled in post-secondary education. So of that cohort, only 69% enrolled in post-secondary education, and only about half persisted into their second year. So that's just, I think it's important because when we think about graduation rates, it's great if we have students graduating, but here we see 91% graduate within 6 years, but only half actually persist into their second year of post-secondary education, so 2 or 4 year college. Then we disaggregated that data in lots of different ways, but what you see represented here is a disaggregation between students who are not economically disadvantaged, which is in blue on this slide, and students who are economically disadvantaged, which is in green. And here you see that there's a real gap or a difference. So while almost all of our not economically disadvantaged students graduate within 6 years, 97%, only 85% of students who are economically disadvantaged graduate. And then you can kind of follow the same logic down here. So 78% of not economically disadvantaged students enroll and 62% persist into their second year, whereas just 61% of students who are economically disadvantaged enroll in post-secondary education, and less than half persist into their second year. And then we see that certain gaps across multiple other subgroups as well. So a couple that we're pulling out here are first looking at 4-year institution enrollment by student subgroups. And so you're looking at the percent of students who enrolled in 4-year institutions, where Asian and white students are significantly more likely to enroll in 4-year college than Black and Latino students. The same can be seen, you see, with the free and reduced lunch, a big disparity between students who receive free and reduced lunch and those who don't. Same thing with identified disability. Only 19% of students with disabilities enroll in 4-year institutions, and only 15% of English language learners. And then we looked at this by 2-year institution enrollment as well, with the same student subgroups. And here you see a little bit of a different pattern where Black students are the most likely to enroll in 2-year institutions. Students who are on free and reduced lunch and English language learners are enrolling in 2-year institutions by a much greater percent than others, those that are not. So, given these outcomes, of course, the big question is, so what can we understand about the contributing factors, or what's predictive of these outcomes? Because ultimately, what we're trying to get to is, what can we do within the pre-K through 12 experience to influence more students to have more successful post-secondary outcomes? So Barrett's now going to step you through some of the key indicators or factors that contribute to the outcomes.
Something I'm not sure if Malia said, but even if she did, worth reiterating that, of course, college is not the only post-secondary outcome that attributes success. However, it's the only one we have data on. So this uses National Student Clearinghouse to draw data, because we can follow what happens to our students after that point. When they go on to career in other settings, we don't necessarily have that. So what you'll see here really is about 2- and 4-year enrollment versus other paths that students take. But so we'll set that as sort of a proxy, and just wanted to orient you to that. So one thing we learned is that students who enroll in advanced coursework and have access to advanced coursework have more post-secondary outcomes as it relates to 4-year enrollment. So there's a lot to this graph. Like all of them, we can go back, but stay on the left side and you'll see the number of courses taken by students who then wind up being persistent in 4 years in institutions. And then you can compare that to those who did not graduate at the far right, and see that they were not accessing, did not have access to advanced coursework. So in this definition, advanced coursework refers to AP and dual college enrollment, because of the two things that we can track. This next slide is even more information. So we'll take a minute to orient you to this, that this becomes essentially a definition, a database definition of on or off track for students once they're in high school. So this compares cumulative GPA and attendance And these are the two strongest factors that predict whether or not a student is on or off track for graduation and on track for success at a 2-year institution or a 4-year institution. So at the top right, in green, we have on track for success at a 4-year institution, and in blue, on track for success at a 2-year institution. In the middle, we have purple with students who are on track to graduate, but not necessarily prepared for post-secondary. And in red, we have the off track, and we see how strong the attendance predictor is of off track, where we can have students who have even a very high GPA, but poor attendance, and then they are off track for post-secondary success. Again, we can go back to any of these. And of course, we wanted to know even earlier, can we predict? Can we understand what's happening for students even earlier? And so we get to early warning indicators, which are 8th grade factors that can be attributed to a student being off track once they're in high school. So we see attendance, again, at less than 90%, 1 or more days of suspension out of school, 1 or more failures of a course that's a core course, so English or math, and then failure on both standardized tests. So an early warning indicator would not have to be all 4 of these, but would just be one of them. So a student could enter high school with one of these things, a different student could enter with a different one of these things. Both would be considered having one early warning indicator. So early warning indicators are not predictive for all of our students. However, for the 25% that do enter high school with an early warning indicator, it is very challenging for them to get back on track. And those who don't have early warning indicators, the vast majority are remaining on track. So they're in that, blue and green on the first on and off track slide. Just about 15% of students who have an early warning indicator are getting back on track during high school. And by the end of 9th grade, we can identify most students who are not likely to have post-secondary success by either an early warning indicator or the on or off track definition shared earlier. Another factor is course failure during high school. Course failure becomes another very strong indicator that a student will become off track. So this is showing only students without early warning indicators, but failing a course in high school, and you see a pretty significant difference in their post-secondary success outcomes. So 2.5 times more likely to have success without course failure. And this is another one that can take a little while, and there's a lot in it. But there's 2 things I think to note. So we know from this data and that what we learned from students, that those who are on track for post-secondary success, that we have students who are on track for post-secondary success but that do not enroll in college. So if we're looking, if you look at the middle line of enrollment, and you do the inverse, we have 11% of students who are on track for 4-year institution enrollment who don't enroll, and 27% on track for 2-year institution who are not enrolling. Another note here is some students in the data show as not on track, but do enroll and persist. And so we have students who essentially are bucking the trend in both directions, and that the data isn't fully representing. So there's a lot more to this slide, obviously, but those are just a couple of key things. So again, when we start to disaggregate our data and we go a little bit more deeply into student subgroups, we can learn even more about what access looks like. So I already showed you a little bit about the advanced coursework, and here's who has access to that, that advanced coursework. 1.6 being the average, the dotted line there in the middle, and we see quite a range of disparity happening both for students based on racial identity as well as whether or not they're eligible for free or reduced lunch, if they have any identified disability, and if they're English language learners. As it relates to the course failure note, we have some students who are more likely to experience course failure based on these same subgroups, and these are students without EWIs as the median there. And then finally, we know from this research that some students are more likely to experience an EWI in 8th grade coming into high school than other students. So I threw a lot of data at you. We're just going to let you know what we're taking away from these findings and some of the key learnings.
Great. So I think the superintendent mentioned this in his opening remarks, but a lot of what this data led us to was kind of affirming of the direction or the path that we're on with the Portland Promise, but it did help illuminate a few areas that we're putting greater attention and urgency around. So the first is around the 8th to 9th grade transition. So basically, we learned that early high school experiences are key to students' outcomes in terms of post-secondary success, and that we have information as early as 8th and 9th grade that can give us a sense of if students are going to be off track for these long-term outcomes. So we really want to focus on the early years and this transition from 8th to 9th grade. Some of the ideas that we're pursuing that were, again, already enacted through the Portland Promise are first just around data systems. So now Superintendent mentioned Jamie and Mustafa are here. We're going to be building into our data system this EWI definition and the on-track, off-track metric so that we can consistently across schools understand this information. It's not going to take an individual crunching the data on their own, and we can communicate from middle school to high school and across high schools if students transition what's going on so that students aren't slipping through the crack. We have this information, we can do something about it proactively. So the data systems are one of the biggest kind of action steps we're taking as it relates to these early years in transition, and of course those will be relevant and useful throughout high school. This reinforces our need to embed these support structures for students who are not meeting standards and not on track in terms of the academic side. So that's the in-school and summer school time where we're giving students additional time who need it with additional support to meet the grade level standard. It reinforces our work that we started around summer transitions and the Summer Bridge program that we launched this year between 8th and 9th grade. And it also really points to the need for freshman programming, which we do have in place. But since this cohort graduated in 2016, some of the work that was supported through the Nellie Mae grant wasn't fully in place for these students as freshmen. So this just reinforces that work that's happened at our high schools around freshman programming that's in place and strong, and that we'll continue to focus on and strengthen. Secondary attendance is another big area of focus that this data points to. Attendance is both an early warning indicator and a key part of the on-track metric for high school. And so we want to flesh out our secondary attendance strategy. Many of you are familiar with the work we've done in elementary over the years with Count Me In. We haven't had the same kind of district level focus on secondary attendance. And so we want to first do a little bit more root cause analysis to understand, okay, why is it that we're seeing some of our attendance outcomes in middle and high school? We want to build out more of a specific attendance strategy that's grounded in the research around attendance. And we know we want to take a closer look at our attendance policy, and we'll be bringing that forward during our to curriculum committee for some policy work. The third area of focus is around rigor and high expectations. So, while, as Barrett mentioned, and like I called out in the very beginning, while a high percent of our students graduate, only half are actually persisting into their second year of college. And students who take more rigorous coursework tend to have better post-secondary outcomes, especially in terms of four-year college persistence. In addition to that, Spring Point was mentioned earlier. They are the group that came and did more of the qualitative analysis. And one of the biggest things that they called out and reflected back to us after observations was the need for rigor and relevance across all of our coursework. So we're going to continue focusing on ensuring this kind of rigorous and relevant coursework for all students to meet standards. And as it's noted here, our emphasis is on rigorous coursework, grade level curriculum for all students, and then supports for those who need them. So not lowering the standard, but keeping the standard high for all and in providing the supports needed. Some of the work that's underway that we'll continue to sharpen our focus and attention around are really that continued work on proportional representation and advanced coursework. Y'all have heard about the Deering work on that front, so we want to look at that more closely and look at what we're doing district-wide. We're starting to look more closely at lower-level math tracks in high school. So Jessie Robinson, our curriculum director, who you might, I think, should be familiar with, she was our middle school math coach before, is partnering closely with our math teacher leaders and administrators in high schools to look at that. And this, again, points to the need for those additional support structures, so time in the day, time after the day, time after the school year for students to get additional support that need it. And then the fourth area, a big application that we took for this, has to do with planning for post-secondary success. So Barrett mentioned that there are some students who we'd expect to have post-secondary success who do not, and the inverse can happen. In addition, Spring Point's qualitative analysis called out from their focus groups and interviews that we have students who don't understand the process of getting into college, don't feel like they're prepared for the rigor once they're there, or don't know what to expect and how to prepare themselves. And so we really want to dig in more to the post-secondary success planning with our guidance team. This, again, is something that's already underway, but this data just puts a finer point on that and gives us some more information to dig into. So we're really trying to better understand what our students need and to really hone the post-secondary success supports and planning, and that will be through the leadership of our guidance team. So in conclusion, we want our students to graduate, but we want to make sure that when they do graduate, they're truly prepared and empowered to succeed in a post-secondary path of their choosing. And so a diploma that doesn't represent true preparation is not sufficient for what we want to hold ourselves accountable to. We know we have more work to do to graduate more students in 6 years, but even more so, we have work to do to ensure that they're truly set up to succeed after high school. And we know this is especially the case for different student subgroups, especially students who are economically disadvantaged, English language learners, students of color, and students with identified disabilities. This data has helped us see that we can predict when a student is likely to fall off track as early as 8th and 9th grade. And so the good news is that we have this data and we can be responsive to it and trying to provide supports and interventions to change these outcomes. And so we'll pursue those for strategies or kind of key priority areas that are already kind of embedded in the plans that we have, but like I mentioned, give us more focus and attention to some of these things that have popped through the data. So that's what we have here. There's a lot more data behind it, but I think we pulled out these insights because they're some of the most salient insights, the pieces that are actionable for us. And so I think, I don't know, Chair Rodriguez, if he's here, if you want to take questions. We're happy to answer. And Jamie is back here as well, our data manager, and Mustafa, and they'll jump in with responses as well if it's more relevant to them.
Ms. Thompson, jump right in, please.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I have a couple questions. Can you just tell us a little bit about the National Student Clearinghouse and how did they, I know we had conversations in the past about IDs on student at the state level, and there was a lot of controversy around that. And so I'm wondering, how does the National Student Clearinghouse work?
So I think, unfortunately, the person that's most familiar with that is not here. But I know that National Clearinghouse does work a little bit with College Board to be able to, because all of our 11th graders do take the SAT. For most of our students, they have kind of a College Board identifier, and we can match that up with the National Clearinghouse through Naviance. The students that don't already have that ID, we do have to, either a guidance counselor or someone like myself does have to say this is the student and this is who they are at Portland Public Schools. But it is easy to see which of our students, like, here's the student, they don't have a National Clearinghouse record. It is easy for us to go in and see if it's because we've never linked them to a student, they're there, but we haven't connected them, or if there's not a record in there for them. Does that answer your question?
Yes. Can I continue, Chair? Okay. So there's a lot of the schools now are no longer requiring the SATs, more and more pulling away from the College Board and not requiring those, and it seems to be a trend across the country. So I wonder how that will come into play with the data that we have. So just food for thought. I don't need an answer on that one. But on the slide that says data overview, Portland Public School Class of 2016 Cohort earned a B+ average weighted GPA and take 1 to 2 AP courses while in high school. I have a question about that. On a slide later, you talk about the dual enrollment, and we have the program, the USM, SMCC, and some online courses. And I was wondering why the dual enrollment is not included here, but also do we take into consideration, and I'll speak from, this is my daughter's class, she took classes at USM and SMCC instead of AP classes because of the test at the end, and whereas if you go to SMCC and USM and get a B, it's transferable, etc. So we did not go after the AP classes. Instead, we went to the college level. So I'm wondering how, we're including that along the way too.
It's included, right?
Yeah, it's included, it's just not in this particular overview. So EY Parthenon gave us different kind of snapshots, and this one happened to be the AP one, but the slide with the green I showed you was a advanced coursework, so that did include both the dual enrollment and AP.
Okay.
It just, this kind of summary view didn't have that too.
Okay, yeah, when I just said AP. And then on the slide, the 2-year institution enrollment by student subgroups, and it calls out the 42% for English language learners, and they have much higher percent than the 4-year. And I'm wondering, again, if that has anything to do with our partnership with Southern Maine Community College and having them enter sooner, and if that's why. I can't recall the name of the program that we had, but there was something that we had that with SMCC that helped our English language learners, and I can't recall what the program was. Do you think that's attributable?
I think it seems like it is, but this, I do want to be clear, this data doesn't have, this is not correlation, there's no correlations in this data. This data is just numbers. So I think a little bit of the spring point, the qualitative review tried to start to get to why are some students enrolling and other students are not, but most of this data just, it's not what the data was collected for to answer. I'm not sure if you want to talk about the connection we have with those, but just that's not what this data was trying to answer.
I'm wondering if that, and again, food for thought, that we don't track something like that, even if it's Portland. I don't think it's Portland specific, but outside of the National Clearinghouse, maybe that's something to look at. Maybe you're already doing that, but I think I have 3 more questions. On the slide, the EWIs and off-track likelihood deeper look, and when you talk about, on average, students with no EWIs take 5 to 6 times the number of AP courses. And again, my question is around the dual enrollment, and I'm wondering if the numbers aren't low because, I just asked Ms. Morioni, because again, my daughter didn't take AP, she went to the college level, who pays for the exams, and if that comes into play because it's very costly. And then that also, if they don't get a certain score, does not translate into college credit, whereas the college does translate into college credit. So I'm just curious about that because, again, we have a disparity of students who can and can't pay for an AP exam, and how is that treated?
We have been paying for the past couple years, and it might be beyond, for students that need assistance to cover the cost of the AP exam. So I think this is really looking at, who's accessing the more rigorous coursework that we offer. But in terms of barriers to access, the money for the exam would be one that we've dealt with over the last couple of years. And there's another part.
No, I'm just wondering what we have in place, because I would think that for some, again, when you talk about free and reduced lunch and various subgroups, that may come into play for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think that could be true, but I think this is, when you kind of take this in the spring point qualitative data as well, I think the larger point was that there seems to be disproportionate access in our system to the more rigorous coursework, and exam fees and things like that weren't called out as a barrier in the qualitative data, though that is something generally we're trying to understand as we kind of dig into root causes in this next stage as we work on the action plans. But I think the qualitative data also talked about students not necessarily feeling like they had access or were getting into those more advanced courses.
Okay, and I just have the two more. On the slide, it says access to advanced coursework by student subgroup. What grade are you talking here on that particular slide?
Oh, by student subgroup. Sorry.
Is that, I just wanted to know if that was high school.
Yeah, that would be during high school.
Okay. So my question with that is, again, I think that we and across the state, I always was challenged with knowing about the dual enrollment opportunities and the lack thereof of people knowing about them, and that they can take multiple classes at once, one at SMCC and one at USM at the same time. And being an involved parent, I finally found that out her senior year, that we can take multiple classes in one semester. And it would be covered. We only had to cover the books. So I've always thought that that's an area in which people just don't know the ins and outs of that, and I'm wondering as well if that could be something that comes into play of helping people understand that.
Yeah, I think that's definitely possible, that who knows about these opportunities and how do they know about them, and what about their parents are helping them get in versus like what's being encouraged at the school. So I think that's definitely something that would be within our control to influence. We don't know exactly how much that's a contributing factor in terms of the root of this, but I think that's a great point.
Okay, and last but not least, when you talk about rigor and high expectations and students leaving school 4-year, 2-year, how much plays into this with FAFSA and financials and scholarships? Because, again, having one that's graduated college and one that's in her junior year in college, every semester actually, it's a challenge. And I'm wondering how much that comes into play when they're leaving college because they just can't afford it. And again, the challenges with the FAFSA of even knowing the access to scholarships, et cetera. So I'm curious about the data around financials, because a lot of them, it may not be that they don't want to be there, but they may not have any resources. We scramble every semester and try to figure it out. So I'm just wondering,
Yeah, that definitely came up, and in that fourth strategy around post-secondary success planning and guidance, that's something that we're going to dig into more deeply. For how many kids is that the issue, and what can we do to support them? With that being said, I do think when you look at this disaggregated data and you look at, like you're talking about free and reduced lunch, like here we only have a huge disparity between kids who are economically advantaged and not, in terms of who's accessing AP coursework or advanced, coursework. You see a higher failure rate for students receiving free and reduced lunch and greater EWIs. So while I definitely think that what you're talking about is a contributing factor, surely, for persistence, and that's part of that fourth strategy, I think what we're really looking at as well is all of these predictors of post-secondary outcomes, as early as 8th grade and into 9th grade are showing disproportionality. And so regardless of the FAFSA and all that, these things are still happening, and these are what predict and contribute to the post-secondary success outcomes, and that's where we want to really put a lot of our attention and focus, because that's, we see this as within our control and also our responsibility to focus on this.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Thompson. Anyone else? Ms. Bondo?
Thank you so much. And I think if Superintendent just remember a couple months ago, earlier the year, that was my big concern about that. So he told me about the grant, about those research. So I'm so glad that we got those research. And I just wonder about a couple things about the first one is on if the likelihood of success can be identified in 9th grade. I mean, the transition from the 8 and the 9 is so important. So I try to figure out who's really defining the classes, because when I look at my own children, the way they have moved, I mean, they already have some classes already made for them for the 9th grade. And then even though they've been having honor classes, but they have some low classes from the 9th grade. So no one been offering the AP classes. So I'll just ask a question to understand who's defined, who must be qualified for the AP classes. Because I know that during as a challenge by choice, who I let the student make their own choice. That's why I make my children coming to choose themselves to those AP class, but no one has guided them with the one they be able to access from the 8th grader to the 9th grader. But because what you look at the course by student by subgroup, those are people of color and the low-income family, those the one they cannot access. So that means that transition from the 8th grade to the 9th grade is so critical. So who does those pathways for those students to be able to have a choice to the AP classes when they are attending the high school?
Yeah. I mean, I know the guidance counselors, and you can jump in here, do a lot of that. Something that changed at Portland High, I think this year, although let me know if you, Superintendent, have more perspective on this, was that typically they were making recommendations for students, but students can now assert what they want, and that might be different than the recommendation, but that they would follow the student's ask on that. But generally speaking, you're raising up part of what we're trying to do as a next step here, which is to really look at that more closely. And what you're speaking to and really hits both this area of ensuring rigor and high expectations for all students as well as the transition, and how are we making sure that we're systematic and consistent in really prioritizing, making sure all students are getting access to opportunities to take advanced coursework. So, I mean, I think that there are things happening that are positive and underway, but this is pointing us toward wanting to put more attention to that, and especially to your point with the transitions as well.
Can I just ask you last more? So those are the research for 2016, and we are 2019. So I try to figure out why we've been focused on 2019, on the 2016, and now we are 2019. It's like a 3 years between us now the result has been, because I all the time been referred the article from the Bengal Daily News, Portland must change how it teaches students of color, and it was 2016. Now 3 years now, we don't have any of those research now, than to see how the results been gone from 2016 to now.
Yeah.
And to see now we're investing on some of the big, like the core instruction that we're doing for the new budget. So how can we make sure that we can have that increase, the evaluation assessment, and analyze those other data to make sure that we're going on the right pathways, because those are 3 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, this was, as we went into this project, one of the biggest and most important things we wanted to get out of it, which was replicable data that we would build into our ongoing systems. So there was some research done prior to 2016, I don't recall the year, by I think the university.
It was the class of 2014, I believe.
Right.
Actually, no, it was probably the class of 2012, because it was in 2014 that United Way led that led that work. So there was a similar study that showed many of the same things previously, and as I pointed out in my introduction, we did not build in the capacity to be able to replicate that going forward, which was, the main reason that we went into this originally. Obviously, we've learned a lot, and that's super important as well, but the main reason was to be able to look at this data. The reason that this looks at the class of 2016 is because you need 2 years after that class graduates to actually be able to look at, did they persist? Did they enroll as freshmen? So the class of 2016, how did they do at the end of 2017 is the sort of the threshold. So I think that that's why this research, so like if we looked at the class of 2018, we won't be able to look at them until the year 2020 to actually be able to replicate that study, but we now have the capacity to do that. So that was a big thing. But again, this data I don't think is strikingly different from the data that was, the foundation for the Connected work around post-secondary success. I think we've gone a little bit deeper in terms of what we can do internally to also influence that. So less about the partnership with SMCC and more about what is our guidance strategy, what is our transition from the 8th to the 9th grade, what is it that we are able to provide people in the middle school that tells them this kid is off track, and something that we've never done before, and build that into our data system so that isn't like somebody crunching the numbers and then determining like, oh, this is a kid who actually meets that early warning indicator. So I think those are the kinds of things that we're able to do as a result of the BAR grant that we can do going forward. But I totally agree with you. There isn't anything in here. I said during my introductory remarks, this is a repeat. You can press the repeat button on every one of our data presentations. It says the same thing. And, I just want to comment to both Ms. Thompson and your comments. I think it's striking that both of you talked about the work that you did as parents of students, so as engaged, knowledgeable parents, to make sure that your children had access to the type of coursework that, we see in this study is a marker of, success in high school and success beyond high school, and that, we say that we are, focused on preparing and empowering, and when we talk about empowering, we say making sure that kids have the knowledge of what it is that they're going to do, and that should not be dependent on whether their parents are helping them to do that, or, that's like, it's in our logo. It's not in the parents' logo. So I think that that's really sort of telling, the fact that you're all talking about what you did to provide that access.
Okay. Just the last one. For the attendance policy, I really want to go more deeper with that, if we can, in the future, because the achievement gap really depend on that. And those subgroup of children really need to have a tracking system where we can have a benchmark for them to make sure that the attendance, they're in school and they're learning. So I think you just mentioned it, and that's the first note that I put here that I heard from you, and I think I will be follow that one closely. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you, Ms. Paul. Anyone else? Mr. Atkinson and then Ms. Morioni.
I just want to pick up on I guess what everybody's been talking about, the differential access to rigorous coursework. And my experience, my kids are younger now, so I haven't experienced as a parent, but I know that my own mother advocated fiercely for me to get into AP courses and whatever gifted and talented type programs were available from early on. And it starts long before middle school, long before high school. Differential expectations, different coursework, different rigor. It starts very early on and persists throughout the educational career of students in our schools. And so I'm really glad that this is, re-elevating that conversation, and I hope that we'll find some ways to make a difference. So thank you.
And if I can just remark on that, I think it's a great point, and I do think, your point that this starts as early as elementary school. If you all recall, when we talked about our core instruction priority for this year, the emphasis there is not on providing interventions that take and separate students into different groups where they get some skills, but rather how are we giving all students access to grade level curriculum and engaging in relevant ways. If we're taking students and we're grouping them by levels and they're never getting access to grade level standards, of course they're not going to meet grade level standards. So I think it's a great point that, we're looking at high school and post-secondary outcomes here, but we absolutely see this as the work of pre-K through 12.
Excellent. Ms. Borioni, and then I'll take a stab at it.
Thank you very much for staff and the hard work, and as well as, once again, being my 11th year on the board, this is another research study that we've seen, and as the superintendent said, it's like it's like Groundhog Day kind of thing. The good news is we keep revisiting it and keep trying. That's what we can do here. But I think my main point is I really, 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 and I think you're already going to do this, but just make sure we consistently bring this back and show it constantly to the community. We're budget season. These are our issues. These are our areas of priority, and I think that you're on the right track with that, much more than we have been in the past. When we talk about it, we'd file it away, and we might not see it again when it came time for budget season. And on that note, we've also heard year after year about the need of guidance counselors playing even a bigger role with our students. And honestly, I don't think we have enough guidance counselors for all that we ask of them. In Deering, for example, just 3 guidance counselors for over 900 students, and even sitting down and talking with those guidance counselors and asking them, so tell me about how you can help my son, who I'm a very pushy parent in the school and pushing for my kids and what they're involved in, but for the kids that don't have that pushy parent, who need that day in, day out, weekly, getting the kids in and discussing different things, they do not have the time. So I'm concerned that we don't have enough guidance counselors and/or their job responsibilities when it comes to particularly preparation for college. That sometimes becomes one of the last things that they can get to with a student when they're just trying to maintain and get them to attend class and to stay engaged in their classes and things like that. So I highly, highly would like to see, I encourage superintendent and staff to bring forward what your needs really, really are with regards to this, and that may mean more, either whether it's guidance counselors or staff that have that role where they can be much more proactive with post-secondary outcomes. I think that we're missing a lot in that regard. On that note, too, that transition, I totally agree with Ms. Bondo and other board members talking about that transition from 8th grade to 9th grade. The way we have seen it as parents is you get a recommendation from that 8th grade teacher, this is the class that we recommend you for 9th grade. And it takes a parent who's kind of aware to check it and know, okay, that looks like that's a rigorous course. But some can't. They don't, necessarily know that it matters. But that 8th grade to 9th grade is such a pivotal point that if they get placed in a lower level 9th grade anything, they're already on it's like a trajectory to not achieving, not going to college. So to me, that transition, and you said it, is so critical. And I think that if we can somehow make sure parents and guardians are so keenly aware of that piece, bringing them in, not just a piece of paper handed to the student to bring home saying this is what you've been recommended for classes, but really a more of an education around that and helping parents understand how they can be a part of that and advocate that next step. That would be really important too, bringing in parents and guardians in that. And then the other question, I'm sorry, I'm just talking, I'm not really asking questions, but the final part is, theirs is a question, is around, we've always been told as well that their benchmarks in the whole grading, all the grades, and third grade reading is sort of that pivotal moment. If they're not hitting that third grade reading, honestly, it doesn't seem like they should be moving on at all, because after that, they would only continue down a road of not even graduation. So I appreciate that we're looking at these older grades and ages, but I think that one, and I think that you are doing that as well, but third grade reading is an absolute must. If they can't do that, then I think it was third grade reading, and is it fifth grade or sixth grade math? There's these like two really big pivotal times that this early warning intervention system, I'm hopeful, could also include those really critical pieces as well. And I completely agree with Ms. Bondo that the attendance policy absolutely needs to come back stronger than ever, because if they're not in the classrooms, they're just not able to learn. And this doesn't surprise me. The only thing that was a little surprising was the 53% that didn't persist in their second year of college. That's very shocking. Anything else? No, that's all. Yeah, I could talk for a long time about this, as you know, but thank you very much for all your hard work and help. And yeah, let's put the pressure on. Let's get the budget, totally around all of this work. Thank you.
Could I make a couple comments on just a little bit of information? I think, so one, I think that point about 53%, we see this 91% graduation rate, but only half of our students persist into the second year of college. I do think, just a connection for you all. That's why retaining the proficiency diploma, the expectation that students don't just get their credit for their time, but they actually master grade level standards, like that right there is the why, because we want to make sure that when you walk across a stage and get a diploma for us, it means that you were at a certain level of preparedness, which creates empoweredness. And so I wanted to name that, because I think sometimes, we haven't been as good and strong with the why behind why actually having all kids meet grade level standards as a baseline is actually critical for setting them up for success. A quick point on your third grade reading. Yes, that is an indicator that, people look at for long-term outcomes and all sorts of things. And so it does just point back to, as you were talking about, Mr. Atkinson, this idea that this is work that starts absolutely, in pre-K and reinforces our strategy, which, as you all know, this year we have a big, deep focus on early reading development and consistent phonics program across the district. In addition to that, we're doing some what we call close reading strategies. So when kids are in middle school and have not yet learned how to read, that teachers know, well, what do we do? Because middle school teachers aren't necessarily trained as reading teachers. So that's part of that reading development work that we're taking on. And then on the 9th grade, I do want to point out that I agree it's critical that it shouldn't depend on if you have a parent who's going to advocate, and I have that story too about me and my math class, that students need to all be getting true access to the advanced coursework, and the coursework that's not advanced coursework has to be quality. You said if you get in, if you're not there in 9th grade, then you're on a track. Like, we want to make sure all of our classes are really pushing students up to grade level standards. So I mentioned that idea that we're really looking at math as a area of focus right now, and how many different leveled entry points we have into math, and whether or not students ever get off, wherever they enter. So I just wanted to call out, it's both the advanced coursework and what's the core curriculum that all students are getting access to. And then I think it's great you're bringing up the guidance point, Ms. Moriani. I think the fourth strategy is really working with our guidance counselors. There's professional standards for guidance counselors, and we've started last year actually some analysis of the % of their time they spend doing the things called for under those professional standards, and then what are the category of things that they're asked to do that fall outside of those national best practice standards. So would love for you to get more involved in understanding what we're finding there.
Excellent. Mr. Norris?
Yeah, you talked about what I was just about to ask about, and I was about to go back to a little bit of what Ms. Morioni said, but more on a macro level from my experience. And I think I just heard of it, but that students are able to choose their own classes coming into 9th grade is a huge step, because I know at Portland at least, you can have like 3 different entry points you set into math specifically, and depending on those, each one you can come out a year ahead in math of the one behind it. And I just wanted to ask if these tracks, these like honors, AP level tracks, were considered at all in the data, because in the qualitative or quantitative analyses, because I feel like as like a grouping for the advanced level coursework, I think a single track can really lead to at least 4 or access to these 4 or 5 like groups of AP classes, or say dual enrollment classes, that say a different track may or may not lead to. And I just wanted to know if any of these were considered in like these groupings, because I know for math at least it's almost impossible to get into the higher AP level math or AP level science if you don't start out on that highest math track in 9th grade, and whether or not that was considered at all, or if it is going to be considered.
One place that was considered was in the Spring Point qualitative analysis, and that's where they came out with that very strong recommendation around rigor and relevance for all students and across, like a guaranteed curriculum. So I think it came out more there. I don't know that we really looked at that tracking impact in the quantitative analysis, but to your point, and are we going to be looking at it? Yes. And I think, like I mentioned, math is a place that we're starting with, because we have a priority focus on math across the district. And once again, we're starting with looking at that in the elementary level. So are all kids in the elementary class actually in there for grade level standards the whole time? So how do we group kids there, all the way up through which math track do you enter into, and where does that lead you over time? That's definitely stuff that we're taking on and looking at very directly. So it's helpful to hear you name that experience that you have and sort of your observation of what happens across your peers.
Awesome, thank you.
Anyone else? Axel, go ahead.
Hi. So I have a question is about the group race, the black. So when you look in your sheet, when the black race like have a high percent, is the same for the English learner. So I want to know, the black race and the English learner have a link or what? Because I don't understand that.
You were nodding. Do you want to answer? So are you? Oh,
To
go
get to
ahead.
the slide.
Is this the slide?
Were you thinking about the college enrollment or the subgroup breakdown?
In the most case, like when you go in the first page, when you have like 30% of black, you have 15% of like English learner. When you go like in the second, you go in black 39,
Yeah.
the English learner is 42. When you go again like in the page number 10, when the black is low, 0.5, the English learner is 0.1. When you go in the page 11, when the black is high again, 33, the English learner is high. I want to know if you have a link.
Like what percent of the English language learner group is black or vice versa? Is there overlap? Yeah. I mean, so yes, we know that in terms of our just general demographic data. But in this case, so I'm looking at four-year institution enrollment. We see 30% black students enroll in four-year institution and 15% of English language learners. So it's not an exact overlap, but there is definitely overlap between students who are black and students who are English language learners. Is that what you're asking? Or yeah.
Cool. I have a couple of questions if no one else has something to add. First question is on one of the first slides on the cohorts, the different demographics, the ELL students. Are these students who graduated and were still designated as ELL students?
I believe so. I think that they cut the data in a number of ways, so there are some data points that we had exited ELLs as well, English learners as well, but in this case I think it's people who graduated and were still identified as that.
Okay,
Disagree?
No, I'm not certain, but it was even before you asked, it was a note that I had made to look. But just from kind of looking at the raw data, I feel pretty sure that both special ed status and English language learner status and the economically disadvantaged status come from our October 1 counts. I believe that that's the data we provided them, and I think it's during their senior year that these come from.
Okay, so they could potentially have graduated and have been exited out of ELL. And so I guess other question about the ELL of students that have exited ELL. So students that have reached proficiency according to the access testing, to what is the outcomes for those students that have exited ELL classes? Do we have that?
Not in this data set, but it is that particular group of students. I know there's definitely a desire in like the district to be looking at that group of students, because in many ways, just we have different kind of expectations for them than we do either the English language learners or the never ELs. But for this data set, that just wasn't how the data was broken out.
Okay.
One of the things that we're excited about, which has been mentioned several times, is the fact that we now can replicate this data and do our own disaggregate it as we want. And we do have data generally in our system about EverL, so students who have ever been English language learners. So that's what's exciting is Jamie and Mustafa will be putting this into our data systems, and we can kind of layer into it other nuance.
Is there any since 2016, the criteria for exiting ELL has changed. We've sort of kind of lowered the bar. So how then do we compare the data from this, since exiting ELL right now is not, I don't want to say easier, but...
Well, that went into effect for 17-18. It went into place last year, but it was retroactive to 17-18. So I do understand where we might be comparing two groups of students, but kind of to a point that came up earlier, if we're looking at enrollment in college and post-secondary success, it's still quite a number of years. Yeah. So we'll just have to be mindful when we get to that point where we can evaluate that we do remember kind of that the cut points changed. And we have started to look a little bit at breaking down that data to see those changes and just see what percentage of students graduate exited that wouldn't have under the old kind of standards.
Yeah. So this is sort of kind of like wishful thinking or almost idealistic thinking. Is there any examples of districts who have a really high ELL student enrollment who offer AP classes in other languages?
Yes. Some of the other cohorts or some of the other schools that were kind of in this program with us actually do that. The big difference, and this was a huge difference between those districts and ours, is that they have one predominant non-English language in their district.
We don't.
And it's like, they look at other English language learners and it's like 85% of them speak Spanish. And that's the only language they offer those classes in. And the question at our table was like, is Spanish even one of our top 5? And then we started to look at our top 5 and the percentage. So that's a lot of schools, our districts are doing that, and they're having a lot of success. But it does pose some different challenges for us if that's something we want to pursue.
Of course. So I asked that, and immediately after I said it, I actually remember reading about Miami-Dade County Public Schools, where I graduated from, whose student enrollment has a really high Spanish population, so they do have access to those classes in that language. But again, that is a predominant second language spoken there. And I guess another question on the graduation numbers. How does, and maybe you did mention this and I missed it, how do these numbers compare to like national averages?
Massachusetts.
Yeah, doing that.
I took it out of it.
One of the things that's hard with comparing this to national averages is that every state has different graduation requirements. So it is, Barrett's looking for kind of some benchmark data from Massachusetts, but it is, we're not comparing apples to apples. Yeah. So it's just hard. It's hard to know what those numbers mean. But I know that we're lower than Massachusetts.
And as Barrett's pointing it out, the reason we chose Massachusetts is because they are known to have pretty high standards, so we want to compare ourselves against another state or district that has high standards.
High expectations.
Nailed it.
Ready? Oh, are you putting something up?
Yeah, so this shows this cohort compared to the state of Massachusetts, and I have two. So this is the racial and ethnicity breakdown, same four groups we had. So you can see us compared to the state of Massachusetts, and that's just about what data is available, because not all states make this as accessible. I think because theirs is high, probably they share theirs, I don't know. So that's this cohort, and then we have it by those other categories, same thing. Sorry, the color changed, I'm not sure why, but same thing. Massachusetts in green are this particular cohort compared in purple.
Cool. Do you mind sending that?
Sure.
Sending that to us?
Of course.
Appreciate that. And I do see kind of like the challenges in comparing two states that have different standards, but I see the value of having a high expectation or high standards to compare it to. I guess my next question had to do with when we talk about AP and dual enrollment or dual class enrollment. You guys kept saying the numbers represent students that are enrolled in it. How does their performance how is their performance indicative of the outcome? So is enrolling just all they have to do, or do they have to achieve highly?
For this data set, it actually was just participation.
Okay.
We are starting to analyze performance, so not only like did you take the course, what was your grade in the course, and did you take the test, and like how did you do on the test? So we're just starting to, just for our own data, to look at kind of proportionality and not only enrollment, but taking the actual AP test also, which is tied to credit. But for this, it was really just enrolling in the course.
And I think over conversations that I've had over the years, am I right in concluding that when a student, just simply by enrolling in these classes and they apply to colleges, just having taken the class, not so much having achieved highly, that alone makes them more appealing to a college? Is that accurate? So encouraging the kids to take it without really putting the pressure of they have to score really highly is still very valuable. Does that make sense? I'm not really good at wording these questions.
I know that College Board would say yes, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I haven't seen any studies that specifically just look at if just attending the course improves like your odds of getting in. So I'm not sure.
I don't know about the getting in, but definitely that taking the course makes a difference in terms of your persistence and your ability to succeed.
That makes sense.
Which is why I think BAR specifically looked at did you enroll in a course, and then looked at post-secondary success. I think that's why they looked at that.
That makes sense. I have a couple more, sorry. I had a lot of time to write. So earlier this summer, I met with a group of students. Some of them were graduates, some of them were current students, the Maine Youth Action Network. I know Mr. Balfans had a chance to meet with them, and I know I've shared some information with the superintendent. And these students who either graduated last year or are seniors this year, one of the things that they specifically were advocating for was more guidance counselors. And specifically, these students were talking about the challenges that students of color have to accessing college information through the application process when their families might not be experienced or knowledgeable in the system. So my question is, we talked a lot about what can be done in the building and what you guys are going to do. What can we, as we talk about allocating resources, as we talk about budgets, what can this school board use to advocate to make what you guys are trying to do possible? Like when that budget goes up to the city council and we talk about we're really trying to meet a need here that over the years has not been met. What is our collective and coherent message?
I mean, I think you know the answer to that.
I do, but I want to hear it.
So, I mean, I think that, this board has been very strong for the past couple of years, advocating and pushing for a equity-based agenda. The work that we did 2 years ago to increase our investments in not necessarily guidance counselors, but people who would sort of make it their life's work to ensure that the kids have meaningful connections to caring adults. And so whether it's our Make It Happen work, whether it's our Yellow work, that's all, specifically around some of the things that, are evident here that we need more of. That is what you heard from the Youth Action Network kids in terms of, we need more people that are going to make this information available to us. What Ms. Bondo, what Ms. Thompson, what Ms. Morioni do for their kids, for kids who don't have somebody at home doing that for them. So that's what that work is all about, and I think the board has been strong in helping us get budgets passed that have a focus on those types of investments. Last year with our pre-K expansion, that's directly related to helping kids to get to 8th grade with grade level skills so that they will be able to have access to the types of rigorous courses that are going to help them to prepare. So continue to do that work as we, come to you over the course of this year with things that are focused around, the 4 strategies that you heard Malia talk about, whether it's, our data systems or whether it's our guidance structures and support, whether it's the transition work from 8th to 9th grade, time in and out of school for kids. Those are the types of things that we need to be able to make investments in if we're going to be able to change these outcomes. I mean, these presentations are super frustrating to me because, I can't imagine what they are to Ms. Morioni, who's been on the board for 11 years, and, and Ms. Thompson, 13 years, I think. So, that you've seen this all before, and, we're having the same conversations. The only way that you change that is by making investments directly in changing those outcomes. And that's, I think, what we have tried to do, and tried to do it balancing the fact that there's lots of other things that we would like to be able to do, and that there's a limit to how much we can get, right? And so I think that that's what you can do, is continue to do the work that you've done, dig into these data and use these data to guide your, that's why we bring it, not because we want to frustrate you, but because we think it's important for you to see that, 13 years, 11 years, 8 years, however long years, on the board, this story is the same story.
Yeah. My hope is that although it's the same story, our approach and our sense of urgency is heightened. One last question before I get into a comment, and this is a clarifying question. At the beginning, you talked about in the first slide, the cohort of students and how we represented the students who came in through the school year or might have exited. Can you clarify that again? Does that include the students who have arrived and happen to be there for 2016?
Yes. Okay. Yeah. It basically, if you entered our district and enrolled, you would be added to the cohort at that point. If you left and moved to another district, you would exit the cohort. That wouldn't be included in what we pulled for the post-secondary data. We wouldn't have followed kids who left our district. So it was really just about those who graduated at that point. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I did. And I was kind of trying to patch in what you guys said at the beginning and what I lost in the course of the presentation. And then one last comment. I've only been on the board less than 3 years. It's heartbreaking, it's frustrating, it's incredibly sad. And when I look at those numbers, I see myself in those numbers, the failing numbers. So I take it incredibly personal. Am I right in am I right in repeating that the higher level of education that someone achieves, the greater amount of income they will receive throughout their lifespan? Is that accurate?
That's
On
my,
average,
yeah.
that is true.
Yeah.
So even though, like you said, there are other paths for our students to take after they graduate high school, going to college and graduating could equate to them being financially secure and then transferring that financial security to their children and then breaking cycles of poverty. Hence why this is so important, because we're not just trying to immediately bridge a gap, but rather change a structure of a society. Thank you. Ms. Bondo. Mr. Bobbins. Ms. Bondo, then Mr. Bobbins.
Thank you.
No, that's not alphabetical order.
Okay. So can we go back to the page 6, please, on the 4 years institution and 2 years institution? Thank you.
Sure.
And those are those two pictures that have been giving me nightmare for years. And when we look at the 2 years institution, you can see that the Latins, Black, free or reduced lunch, English learner is more higher on the 2 years than the 4 years. So that means those students, they just be able to go to the community college. Cannot never be able to access to the high achievement university. And then the reason that I'm saying that is that college is not university. When they look at the profile of the student, they just don't look at the grade. They look at the AP classes. So now I was surprised to see on my daughter when she came 2 years ago, she said, "Hey, mommy, I'm just so glad that I had those AP classes." Because when they've been looking at all the profile, those are the AP classes they've been looking for. So when you look at those 2 years enrollment, those students will never be able to get any AP classes. So that means that cycle of those students been locked on the welfare for years. And then we have those data for 2016, and I'm just wondering about what's going to happen now. If we have some of the data, then now by schools right now, with the high schools, how many of those students and we have on the AP classes for Deering High School, for Portland High School, and for Casco Bay High School? Because even though we're waiting on that for a couple more years, we are building those students to stay on the same position. I mean, they're never going to have a chance to succeed, to have a high achievement, because everything they've been proposing is the community college. And even though we try to invest on the guidance, adding more guidance, if those students cannot be able to access the AP classes, whatever we do, never going to be able to succeed. So I wonder if we can get data right now from the 2017-18, at least to know how many students we have taking those AP classes for each high school, and then better have the profile done for different colleges they can be able to apply for. Can we?
So let me just, we did talk about this at the last meeting when we did because that is when we did the presentation on the Portland Promise status. That is the, one of the indicators that we look at for the equity. We have the overall improvement in test scores, but also the proportionality in positive things like advanced classes, as well as in, things that are also where you have disproportionality and discipline and things along those lines. So we talked about the fact that we are working on that. That was one of the areas that we did not have that we did not report on, but we are cognizant of that, and Jamie is working very hard to get us the analysis on that. And then I just want to, say one thing. Going to a 2-year institution does not preclude you from being able to access a 4-year institution after the 2 years. So that, and I understand where it's coming from. I just want to be clear. We have lots of kids that for financial reasons, for proximity reasons and things along those lines, wind up going to a community college for 2 years and are very successfully then transitioning on to other post-secondary institutions. So I don't want to give the impression in any way, shape, or form. And that's, I think, Malia talked about doing a deeper dive in understanding the reasons, and that's sort of the whole guidance piece of this is about really understanding why do kids choose. So, is it because of finances? Is it because, that's the only thing that we've exposed them to, and sort of understanding that and breaking those cycles is what this work is about. But I just want to make sure that everybody understands that we don't think that, it's a bad thing to go to a 2-year institution. For many kids, that is, the way to get to higher education. So.
We can debate on that. It just depends on the different opinion. Thank you.
All right, we're debating on Wednesday.
Yes.
Mr. Baldwin.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for this presentation. Looking at the way forward, I know that the staff and the committees will be working on different aspects of the way forward, and I'm sure that individual updates will come up on certain aspects of it. But I request that we have, at an appropriate time, a comprehensive update on our progress, because I know I would like to know where we are later on. So, thank you.
I have one more thing that I forgot to, that the Maine Youth Action Network students mentioned to me that I made myself a note and I got lost in my 7.5 questions. One of the things that the students really wanted to advocate for was guidance counselors that were knowledgeable and could direct them in accessing and inquiring towards HBCUs, especially when we have such a high percentage of Black students in our schools. How appealing that would be and how encouraging it would be for them to be in those environments. And I'm wondering how much that could contribute to their perseverance in staying beyond the first 2 years.
I mean, I think it's a great point, and it again falls into that fourth strategy around really understanding needs, root causes. I mean, that's part of our plan, what you got to do with that group of students to have more of those focus groups, to flesh out, what are some of the changes or things we want to deepen in our practice in terms of our advising.
Any other questions? No. This was wonderful. Again, the information that we're all somewhat familiar with and should not be surprised with, but it's so important for us to highlight once again and for us to point to strategies where we can, gain some ground in these huge gaps. So thank you so much for all the work. I can imagine how many hours you guys have put into this and how many more are still to come. Yeah, way to go. So proud of it.
Many thanks to the Bar Foundation, too, because this has been quite an opportunity for us
Certainly.
To really dive in at this level.
Absolutely. I'm very fortunate of us to have that. Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Next, we don't have any old business, so new business. We have a first read to authorize the board chair and superintendent to sign for a state revolving loan on approved projects. There are no comments on first reads. But we do have a workshop on that. Ms. Stoddard is going to prep us up. Go for it. Oh, who's going to?
No, we're doing the workshop after
my butt. I'm sorry.
Session, but I just want to point that
I feel
out.
like I should have known that. Next, personnel items, consideration and action to approve the personnel items listed, 1 year only teachers. Is there a motion? Ms. Trevorrow, second by Ms. Thompson. Will the superintendent please speak to the motion?
I'm going to let Ms. Stoddard do that.
Yeah.
Hi, so in front of you, you have 5 one year only teachers for your approval.
Thank you. Are there any questions on the motion? Seeing none, there's no public comment on personnel items. Any board discussion? Seeing none, we'll put it to a vote. All those in favor of approving the personnel items listed, 1 year only teachers, please indicate. It's unanimous with the students voting in favor as well. Thank you. Next, consideration and action to approve the personnel items listed, election of probationary teachers. Is there a motion? Ms. Morioni, second by Ms. Trevorrow. Ms. Barbara, you want to go ahead?
Sure. You have 13 teachers in front of you, all budgeted for your approval tonight.
Thank you. Any questions on the motion? Seeing none, no comments, no public comments on personnel items, so any board discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving the personnel items listed, election of probationary teachers, please indicate. And that's unanimous with the students voting in favor as well.
say something real quick?
Yes.
Yeah, I also have 2 administrative acknowledgements. So these are individuals that are non-represented employees, so the board is not acting on them. But as you know, we've had some turnover in our finance department, and we are happy to announce that we are bringing 2 new staff into the department. Kathleen Jensen is coming in as our payroll manager, and Kevin Fogg as our staff accountant. So I want to congratulate Ms. Fasulo on her hard work to get these positions staffed. These are both quality candidates, and we're very much looking forward to having them join the team.
Thank you, Superintendent. Next, given that it's before the hour of 10 o'clock, it's actually before the hour is 9 o'clock. I always like to point that out. Is there any public comment on items not on this evening's agenda? If so, please come up to the podium, introduce yourselves with your name and address, please. You'll have 3 minutes to address the board. You have the floor.
George Rowe, I live in West Bayside. I'm virtually a neighbor of your school district headquarters operations. And I came to the first meeting in August of the board, and I had meant to speak and was distracted at the last possible moment because your public comment phase is sometimes very brief. And I was listening earnestly to your solar discussion. And the solar discussion for me was kind of fraught with the discussion of, is this board in a position to make these kinds of decisions? I think, and the Bear Grant funding discussion was a great example of where you're doing your best work, which is student learning, student outcomes, what's happening in the classroom, what's happening with your district personnel. When you guys get out there and beyond that, you don't necessarily have the amount of expertise that you need to make good decisions. And you're trying to listen to the voices that are coming here. And what ends up happening is at some point down the road, the gap between your capacity and the reality hits. And I am living with the consequence of that. I am a neighbor of the school district headquarters in Bayside that members of this board thought was a great idea in 2013 to buy this falling down building, basically, and some neighboring parking lots, and reinvent your citywide operations through this building. And it hasn't gone very well. And we're in the midst of unraveling your Bayside learning community as we speak. And so what concerns me is I'm hearing about you talking about this ambitious solar project, and in my view, you can barely take care of a building that you inherited under really bad conditions a few years ago. And I see this disjunction, and it worries me. And this whole solar industry is a whole nother can of worms. I mean, Walmart is, suing Tesla. Literally, your solar panels are blowing up on the wall, on the roofs of Walmarts all over the country. The city embarked on a massive project out on the Ocean Avenue landfill, and it's already a money pit. It's already not even coming anywhere close to meeting their break-even point for a host of reasons. They went on the political feel-good side, and they ended up forgetting how complicated this stuff gets. And again, back to my particular little issue, the school district headquarters is what a lot of people in the city see as the school. And I will be wrapping up.
Do you need another minute?
I'll take another minute.
We'll give it to you.
Mr. Jennings, when he took over as city manager, he was very focused on how people feel when they come into City Hall. And he has taken resources to make sure that people, when they come into City Hall, feel like things are being looked after. But when people pass by the school district headquarters in Bayside, they see chaos, they see dysfunction, they see neglect, they see an inability to do things right. And I don't think, and I know that your superintendent does not want that impression, I don't think any of you want that impression, but that's the impression that's happening. And I tried to get out in front of this a few years ago and offered to try and work with you guys. And I got pretty much frankly, a very patronizing series of steps where I wasn't even, I was kind of patted on the back and sent on my way. That's not the outcome I was looking for. I really know the stress that you guys are under to do a lot of other things. And taking care of a building or the perimeter of a parking lot is stuff you would rather not have to be doing, but it speaks volumes to the rest of the city. And you have to make sure that you're balancing the appearance of things and the reality. And I'm not comfortable right now where things are at in Bayside, and it makes me really worried about what can of worms lies down the road for things like these ambitious solar projects. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you for the extra time.
If there is no other public comment, we'll close the floor. And is there a motion to adjourn the business meeting? Ms. Trevorrow, second by Ms. Bondo. All those in favor, please indicate. It's unanimous. We've adjourned at 8:46 p.m.